Good morning. We look today at 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 19. And Paul has been addressing some issues that are in Corinth and within the church members of Corinth and within the community. And today, what we're going to look at talks about his instructions concerning marriage. You know, he says, concerning the matters about which you wrote. So, I mean, he received a letter. He received, correspondence from the people, someone in Corinth, wondering about how do we deal with this issue and how do we deal with that issue. And, I mean, this is what we call the first letter of Corinthians. It's the first one that's in our Bible, but there's a lot of evidence that there was another previous letter from Paul to the church in Corinth. And so, they had some correspondence back and forth, and I'm sure that was quite common, that there were more letters that went back and forth than we know about and everything. But he talks about marriage, and he talks about sexual immorality, and he says each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband, and you should be faithful to that wife or that husband, to your spouse, and you should... he says the woman doesn't have authority over her body and the husband doesn't have authority over his body. It isn't that, so often we see this patriarchal society where, the woman is supposed to be silent and obey, well, that works both ways. I mean, those marriage vows work both directions, for husband and wife, and we're partners in our lives together. And when we care about somebody else, I remember telling many people, that marriage is not always a 50-50 situation. Often it seems like it's a 75-25 or a 100-0, because sometimes we just really need to pull together and pull the whole weight of the thing, because God has figured out that it's good for a man and a woman to be together. That's why he created Adam and Eve both in the very beginning. And people will say, well, it's nice that you're buying groceries for your wife. I probably do the majority of our grocery shopping, and it's not a big deal. I'm not helping her with that, but I'm being a partner in our relationship. And this is what Paul is saying, is that, work together, and he talks about our sexual relationships, that, if not to withhold it unless you decide together to abstain for a certain time or whatever, but to do things that are mutually uplifting, and to work 100% together. We are partners in this life that we have together. Partners, especially with our spouse. Also, we can carry this into our community. We are partners with our community. We can't expect somebody else to pick up everything for us and stuff that way. But, he talks about that, in our marriage relationship, and he talks about the matters of sexual intimacy. And he says that, don't withhold this sexual relationship from each other, because if you do, that may cause, Satan to enter in with this lust, and then you end up with affairs and different things. He doesn't use the word affair, but he says, don't deprive each other except by agreement for a short time. Devote yourselves to prayer. Come together so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Paul understands this urge, this desire, this need for a body in the matters of sex and relationships, even though Paul, is not married, or if he was married, he's a widower now. It's not very clear, but, he does say, if you aren't married, such as I am, he says that in verse 8, to the unmarried and the widows, I say it is well for them to remain unmarried as I am. But he understands, even though he's not a married man, he understands that we are partners. We're partners in life. We uphold each other. We uplift each other. We strengthen each other. We encourage each other. We don't put each other down. We we're partners in everything. And I've read several different things lately about, I don't help my wife with dishes. I mean, I'm a partner in it. I mean, it's the way we live. It's the way we act together with each other, is that one person isn't a total authority, one person isn't a slave, one person doesn't have to do everything. I mean, we are in this together, and this is the way it should be. And then in verse 10, he says, to the married I give this command. And he says, not I, but the Lord, that the wife should not separate from the husband. And if she does, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled, and that the husband should not divorce the wife. God had, Moses had come, and we got so many people that are just not working out together. God, can you figure out a way we can write a certificate for divorce? And God relented from his, you shall take this man and you shall take this woman, and they shall not be separated. And he had made allowances for this writ of divorce, and it was getting way out of hand. And when Jesus was asked about, well, what do you say about divorce? Jesus had said, in the very beginning, God had intended that there would be no separation, for the two have become one. They're no longer two separate, but they are one, knit together in this bond of holy matrimony. So Paul quotes or rephrases Jesus' answer, and he says what God had intended at the very beginning, that neither wife nor husband should divorce the other. And then he says, but if they do, remain unmarried. And I know some people that have been very conscientious about that, that for whatever reason their marriage ended, and they said, well, it would be against God if I was to remarry or whatever, but Paul is reiterating what Jesus said, do everything you can to remain in this committed relationship. It needs to be a two-way street. I mean, we need to work together. I mean, this is what God would have, and this is what they continue to say about. Paul goes on in verse 12. He says, verse 10 was, to the married I say, and then now to the rest I say, and not I, but and then he says, I, not the Lord. So I mean, verse 10 and 11, he was quoting from Jesus, or he was rephrasing what Jesus had said, and now he's saying, this is my opinion for those of you otherwise. He says, if you have a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, don't divorce her. If you have a husband who isn't a believer, don't divorce him, but live with him. And he goes on and he says, that because of the husband or the wife in this situation being a believer, the other may also become a believer. And that not only that, but the children of this union will most likely be believers because of one of the parents is a believer. And he says the unbelieving husband, I've got 14 through 16 bracketed, for the unbelieving husband is made holy through the wife. The unbelieving wife is made holy through her husband. I mean, this is another part of that partnership. This is another part of giving all we have for the other. And when I say giving all, it doesn't mean just, being a doormat. I don't mean that at all. I mean, it means that we put 100% of our effort into making this marriage relationship work and to be the very best that it can be as far as it depends upon us. We're never to be a doormat, never to let ourselves be taken advantage of, completely that way, but to be honest with each other, to be open with each other, to communicate when we're not happy with something, to share that, to express that, but to work together, to uplift each other. And, he says, your wife, for all you know, you may save your husband. Husband, for all you know, you may save your wife. And this was, we got to think, too, that this was written 2,000 years ago when there were a very minute percentage of the population were Christians. There was a very small group of people, that believed in Jesus as Lord and Savior. And so for Paul to say that, husband, you may save your wife, woman, you may save your husband. I mean, this was very, very much a reality. I mean, in today's world, maybe not so much, but the reality is that if I lead a life of faith, or if my wife leads a life of faith, it's much more likely to still to rub off on me and to encourage me, to encourage the other in their life of faith as well. And he talks about that. And the last few verses we look at today, he says, "Let each of you lead the life the Lord has assigned. This is my rule in all the churches." And then he talks about, there was a time of circumcision. I mean, and don't let circumcision be what makes you or breaks you, whether you are or aren't. Don't make that make you or break you. But the very last thing we read today is obeying the commandments of the God is everything. Obeying the commandments of God is everything. And that's in all the things that we do. And I think we're all aware of the 10 commandments. Those are the commandments of God as to how we lead our lives, how we relate to God and how we relate to others. We obey God, and our life will be a whole lot better. I mean, I just truly, truly believe that when we do our best to follow God, when we do our best to be good people, to be the best that we can be in our relationships with others, life will be much better. God's blessings again to you today.